Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm going to pick up where I had technical difficulties in the previous workshop, which was on edible landscaping. The previous presentation. This workshop is going to be on the planning process. Um, but I'm going to start off with beacon food forest, which would be considered another type of edible landscaping. In this case, it's more of a cooperative between a municipality and the community to provide food and environmental education in an urban environment. In this case, this is in, I believe, Washington State. There's been a lot of activity in this realm. I'm seeing, America's first public food forest and things like that, though I know for a fact that there are many more around the country. And I've got friends who have them as well. So in moving forward, did that work? No. So I wanted to share as well another way of looking at edible landscaping. And so the vacation homes for many Russians, in this case in 2011, they produced 40% of the food for that country, 80% of the berries, 80% of the potatoes, and 66% of the vegetables. So many European countries. I've got a friend from Germany who's got a summer home somewhere in Germany, and they do exactly the same thing. And so I'm throwing this in there because it doesn't necessarily have to be this strictly aesthetic practice. It can also be part of your vacation time. Now moving on, and I don't know why I can't scroll forward well. So Charlie Nardozzi's book, Foodscaping, says to start small, but have a plan. In permaculture, it's always start small and get experience and see what works and build upon that. Plant the right plant in the right place. Previously, I was talking about sun and shade. That's primarily, as long as one's taken into account climate and water, that would pretty much be the next step. So understanding the needs of light for your plant. If you're planting a sun-loving plant on the north side of a tree that's in part of your edible landscaping, it won't do so well. It'll get leggy, might not make it. So we have to pay attention to what the needs are of each plant. And then there's companion planting that comes into play. And then as a person asked earlier, in regards to empty spaces, when a plant comes out, we can also look at succession planting. So Charlie mentioned the top 10 underrated edibles. That'd be an alpine strawberry, which is basically like a strawberry. It's tiny, but it's got a strawberry flavor that outcompetes a grocery store strawberry by a long shot. I think they're great. Currants and gooseberries. Depending on where you are, I know Massachusetts and some other northern states that do a lot of timber work. There are restrictions on currants and gooseberries, but they do have varieties out there that are white pine blister rust resistant. Eggplant, I mean, there's white ones, purple ones, skinny ones, long ones, round ones, all sorts of different kinds. Elderberry, one of my favorites. I'm propagating a bunch right here, right now. Kale, leeks, parsley, peppers, serviceberry, which is also called amelanchier, or shadbush. That tends to grow natively up I'm in Connecticut, so they're used as street trees. I like the berries a lot. Birds get them pretty quickly, but they're really good. And sweet potato. So this is, again, the part that was missing from my earlier presentation. So I'm going to be going through basically all of these in the next few slides, and then we'll move on. So here are raspberries as a foundation plantation. I'm sorry, these are raspberries as foundation plants along a house. They can also be along a fence. Edibles and islands.
Sven?
Yes.
Could you, this is still fairly new to me. Could you say what you mean by foundation plant?
So in this case, it's along a structure like a home. It could also be along a fence. So it's basically a planting along a vertical surface.
Oh, okay.
And so when we start getting into the second half, the real nuts and bolts of planning, if this house was brick faced and this wall faced due south, plants that are actually more heat loving would like that environment because of its microclimate. And so those bricks would absorb heat and radiate that heat back out when it's cooler outside. So the ambient air is of cooler temperature, those bricks would still be warmer and heating those plants. So you can get away with warmer season plants depending. Some of it's going to be trial and error in this case. So I would say a fence would not work as well as a brick home in making that choice. So a lot of this is really, it's technical analysis of what you're working with. But basically, to answer your question, a foundation planting is along a vertical structure.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. And so here we have an island. This could be akin to a raised bed, though it's only a couple inches tall. We should pay attention to watering needs of raised soil like this, because it'll drain down to the standard soil height around it. Plants can dry out a little bit more. So if this was mine, I would quite possibly have drip tape or something like that in it. Probably not with it being this shallow, but if it was any deeper, I would have to pay attention to watering needs. Edibles and hedgerows. In this case, I believe we're looking at blackberries. Edibles as barriers. So this is in West Hartford. This photo was shared with me. This practice, these are stone fruit, I believe peaches. This practice is called pleaching. And so you can see multiple trees with branches coming out, basically forming a Y pattern. But as you go up, they crisscross even further. And so this is actually basically a fence line. And the sweet thing about this is on the other side of this, and I actually have not visited this site. My goal is to do so soon. But from another image, there was a bench. So there was a bench for the public to sit with their back to this row of fruit trees. And on the other side of that, the homeowner is able to access fruit as well, but keep a barrier of some sort between their property and what they have offered the public, which I thought was just absolutely beautiful. I want to meet that homeowner. My goal is to knock on their door and have a chat with them and to understand what was going through their head when they put this together, because I can only see this as love for community while also wanting some privacy. So it means a lot to me. We need to see a lot more of this. Edibles in containers. This is a beautiful picture. Edibles in small spaces, again, it's containers, but it could be an island, so on and so forth. And so I'm gonna not go through this list right now, but it's basically where I got a lot of my material from, and I've added Stephen Barstow's book to it because it was asked earlier. And my goal is to get through this part and then get into the other presentation. So I'm gonna exit out of here. Oh, where are you?
Do you want to exit from the share?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to exit out of that instance of PowerPoint and then I'll switch over to the next one. My guess is, I wanna, so this to me, does everyone see somebody hugging a tree?
Yes.
Excellent. So I thought it was very important to share this. It goes along with some other aspects of what I heard as I was standing by today. And so this little young lady I met when she was 1.5, when I was probably a few months or a year into urban homesteading in 2008. And when when she became old enough, she was in my garden all the time. Here she is, about 4 or 5. She had moved and wanted her own garden, her own fruit trees, her own fruit bushes, and basically, in my opinion, entered kindergarten as a master gardener. Um, when her dad would take her for the weekend, he would try to feed her McDonald's and so on, and she refused. She'd basically go an entire weekend without eating. And because she was used to fresh fruits and vegetables coming from my garden, and because I was friends with her and her family, I would sit and eat with them a lot. And so one day while she's waiting for school, she had her mom take this picture. And I never spoke to her once about hugging a tree. And so in those few short years that I got to spend with her, I feel that she truly got it. And now she's going to be a person that grows up understanding the connection between food and the earth and having a love for that. And so, I mean, I implore folks that if you have children, even if you do not like to garden, garden with them. Learn yourself, but if you know, do it for them, because it's a lot harder to work with older people, I have found, and change their ways. But if you're molding a young mind and heart through food, is a beautiful way. So now I'm going to move on to the PowerPoint presentation on the design process. Okay. What are you folks seeing?
We're seeing your desktop.
Oh, okay, that's
So
not
we're seeing PowerPoint, so you need to turn on the show.
okay. I'm trying here. What do you see now?
We're still seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay. Um.
If you hit the slideshow link
Oh, that's probably why.
at the top of the page, there you go. That's it.
Okay. Now you're just seeing the design process?
No, it's showing me the speaker view.
Okay.
Um,
I'll get it. Here we are.
there you go.
Okay. Um, so I'm not going to go into this drawing too much, but this is a recent edible forest garden design for a local client. And so I'm going to move on quickly. What are we looking at for time?
You got about a half hour.
Okay. So my goal is to cover goal setting, the scale of permanence. I'm not going to read that list off. We're going to go through each step. And but this is basically the tool that many permaculturists use to document and plan for a site. So the goal, I gotta move this over. So in regards to goal setting, and I mentioned this in the last talk, it's really important to understand what it is one is trying to achieve, whether it's for yourself or for a client. And we've got short-term goals and long-term goals, and a lot of it actually has to do with how does one wish to live and how does one want to be. And then the design process is more about understanding the opportunities and constraints of a landscape in relation to a client's goals. Some of their goals will not be met because a landscape or soil or sun or the amount of sun or things of that can come into play. So it's very important to kind of be soft. I mean, your goals are very important, but it's also you have to be willing to work with your landscape. So where to begin? Like what crops should you grow? What are their soil, light, and moisture requirements? What is your water source? Are you looking for your site to earn you a living? Are you looking to heat your house, regardless, say, with your woodlot? How much would you like to work? Your time that's available. All these are examples of goals, of aspects that go into the goal setting. And then the term articulation is used to distill the fluff from that. So the goal is to get it down and get it good. So basically making a list of your ideas and wants, and then you're able to find patterns in that and tighten that up and tighten that up until you have 2 or 3 sentences in active tense. That would be something in the realm of one goal is to develop a homestead that enables me to earn a living from products I grow. You would change that to I sustain myself financially with products I produce from my property. So in the latter one, it carries more weight and makes the goal feel more real, as if it has already been achieved. That way you have something better to work towards. And then, well, basically, as I was saying, 3 sentences that describe your overarching goals. And you'll know when it's right, when it starts to feel right. When it's not bumbly and chunky, but it starts to feel smooth and you kind of feel like you're in that space already just by reading what you've written. So the history with this, the scale of permanence, which I'm about to go through, came about through P.A. Yeomans in Australia in the late 50s. And he was an earth worker, earth mover, and developed this particular practice for his landscape. And then eventually it became used widespread in Australia, mostly because of their arid environment in the center of the island or continent, and it being far more moist along the periphery or on the edge where the landmass meets the water. David Holmgren and Bill Mollison, the founders of Permaculture, changed it a little bit, but they basically, as you can see, still use the same pattern or same flow. Dave Jackie and Eric Tonesmeyer, both teachers of mine and mentors, added to that as well in their Edible Forest Gardens 1 and 2. And then a training that I've taken since learning of permaculture called the Agrarians Platform with Darren Doherty reduces that a little bit. And Darren's interesting in the sense that he's added economy and he's also added holistic management into climate. So the goals aspect that I just went through would fall under climate because that's your own personal climate with Darren Doherty. It doesn't so much sit in that realm in the rest of these practices, but Darren's really taken multiple practices and synthesized them into the Agrarians Platform. And I feel that's a great tool, especially with the holistic management and economy in place. So that economy could be anything from the food I produce in my yard saves me money at the grocery store, or the food I produce in my yard I sell to my neighbors. So that can be a helpful tool in that. So in looking at climate, and again, this does not include the holistic management and goals part, you'd be looking at plant hardiness zone, future climate change issues, your annual precipitation, seasonal distribution of said precipitation, your latitude. Latitude has me thinking of, I have to turn around for a second. Oh, Elliot Coleman on his 4-season farming. I mean, he's up in Maine. I believe he's at 72. I could be very wrong. But he realized that plants growing at the same latitude in France basically had the same and primarily light as he did. So he was able to visit France, look at what they were growing at that latitude, and bring that back to Maine and grow more foreign crops, we'll say, and build off of that, which I thought was really interesting. Your wind directions, growing degree days, that's very important for a lot of fruit and nut. Your average frost-free dates, chilling hours, extreme weather. In Darren's course, we designed a dam system, which is ponds, that would take, I believe it was a 500-year storm incident. And I believe when it was planned out, it was maybe 100-year due to the engineering and the state and all that fun stuff on what they were willing to fund. And so that was pretty interesting. So we have an image of the USDA hardness zone map. I'm currently in zone 6 way up here in Connecticut, 6A to be precise. More inland is 6B. Here's the annual precipitation for my area in Connecticut. It says Hartford. I'm in New Haven. I don't think there's another weather station closer to me, so we can see how much rain per month we get. You add it up, you have your annual precipitation. And I'm going to touch back on this in a little bit in regards to another step. So what we do with this, and it's probably better that I say this later on, it's kind of a feedback loop. So the more of this information that we're able to collect and then go to the next step, we kind of go back to the top and connect the decision-making process, let's say from step 3 to step 2, which is connected to step 1. And as you build this catalog of information in regards to your site or your area, you just have more information to work from. So now we're going to go into landform. So we want to look at slopes, topographic position, where a site or what we're working on, where it's located, your bedrock geology, your surface geology, nutrient content, estimated seasonal high water table. Around here, and probably many other places too, I would think your wetlands, your legally delineated wetlands really come into play. I pull those up in GIS, which I'm going to get into in a moment. Your elevation, how far from sea level, and landslide potential. So this is a Lidar derived topographic map for a farm site I was working on in Granby, Connecticut. And I'm trying to remember. So I did not use the DEMs, which are digital elevation models, to create this topographic map. I believe I have the entire state of Connecticut at 2-foot contours that I work with. So this is these brown lines were created from that digital elevation model, and this is basically what I import into a drawing. The property boundary, I don't recall where I got that from most of the time, or at least I can pull that sometimes from Municipal GIS sites, depending on where one is. But this has you understanding your landform. As you can see here, with all these lines so close together, it is really steep, and then it's kind of shallow, and then it's really steep again. And in this case, we've got a slope coming back down here and then all the way down the property. And you can see there are variations. It's very important to actually be on the ground and truth this out. And I have run into differences between what I found in Lidar derived topography and what I see on the ground. A lot more of it is nuance though. So, but that's also important. It's especially in regards to managing water. And this would be a municipal topographic map. This is what you'd find as a PDF downloaded from your municipality. In this case, it's got topographic lines as well. This actually really white area in the center is wetlands. I don't have it, but I could pull up another slide or create one that would show this all as wetlands. And so in this case, this is my client's property. And so the wetlands actually go into her property kind of like that. And so we have to be really careful with mostly nutrient runoff and any damage or change to the wetlands because they're protected. Next, we have water. So we're looking at existing sources of water, location, quality, quantity, how, if there's an underground system or above ground system, how that's laid out. Your watershed boundaries, which are basically your peaks in the area. I can look out my window. I'm on a slope. I can look out my window. I know there's a pond slash lake, and on the other side of that is another peak or a ridge. I'm sorry, ridges. And so I know that the water is flowing down my property into that pond. It's flowing off of that ridge into that pond. And so basically that pond is the center of the watershed. And that flows actually all the way down into New Haven and provides drinking water. Roof runoff patterns, where gutters are located and downspouts, potential pollution sources, road runoff, chemical runoff from vehicles, so on, from your neighbors with their chemicals, as one of the talk before mine was talking about. Flooding, ponding, puddling areas, where on your property does it get wet and stay wet? That would end up being put onto a base map, and we'll get into that in a little bit, and I'll bring that up again. Let me see. Where your septic system is, old wells, is there erosion? So here we have a watershed map. This one is Granby again, that where I had shown that Lidar map. Unless this was in GIS, I can't really do much with this, and this is derived from Lidar. Basically, everywhere where you see a blue line is a waterway, and generally those are in the valleys. So you can figure that anything in between is higher landscape, and water's always moving towards these blue lines. So here we have a house, looking at it from the roof in a plan view. And now back to water. So I can't really, oh, I have downspout listed right here. It's so tiny on my screen. But there's a downspout here and a downspout there and one there and one there. So right here we have what, 662 square feet. So for reference, 1 inch of rain on 1,000 square feet is 612 gallons of water. And so we saw back in underwater that we basically averaged 4.4 inches of rain per year in Connecticut. I'm sorry, per month. And so I'm actually looking at, and let's just pretend instead of this being 662, it's either 500 or 1,000. Let's just pretend it's 1,000 square feet. That makes it really easy for argument. 1 inch of rain on 1,000 square feet is 612 gallons of water. And so if we're designing a water catchment system or whatever, I would know, based upon the seasonal distribution of precipitation, how much water I can collect on my property, and also off my roofs, especially since it's a impervious surface. It's different off of land because we've got to take into account the infiltration rate. There are tables for that based upon the NRCS soil web tool. I believe the classifications are A, B, C, and D. Without looking at them, I don't recall which one is which. But so, and that basically takes into account pervious surfaces, whereas your roof is an impervious surface. Your driveway is an impervious surface. And they're all places where whatever falls onto it will run off. Legal issues, I always refer to a town's zoning, and depending on what I'm looking for, I try to download it as a PDF. and then I'll search chickens or compost or whatever, and depending, there will be, you know, like in New Haven, you're allowed 6 chickens, but they need to be this far from a property line. I believe bins are also supposed to be away from a property line, but each town is different. Um, and that really needs to be looked at, because all you need is a neighbor complaining that you've done this or done that, and we all know those people who will cause problems. But also, I mean, like, look at zoning setbacks for sheds and other buildings, trees and shrubs in relation to septic systems. Some towns have that in its regulations. I brought up um, ribes in relation to white pine blister rust. Neighborhood associations, you know, your mailbox can only be blue or green or red or whatever. That needs to be looked at, so that's be on top of your municipal codes. And then, you know, the costs for to have to do some of this work, your permits and so on and so forth. Okay, moving on. Access and circulation. How do you get around your property? And in relation to what you're looking to put into your property. So, and by that I mean a compost bin, a tree here, this, that, whatever. And how do you move around your site? So I remember a few years ago, there was a woman on Facebook who was asking about where she should put her goat shed. And I just responded, I was like, place 4 sticks in the ground, you know, they're 1 foot long, stick them in the ground, drive your car, truck, whatever, wheelbarrow as far as you can get it towards there. Did you have to go uphill? Are you carrying a 100-pound bag of food or a 25-pound bag of food? And basically position that that structure. The easiest way for it is for you to get it from your car or your vehicle to that particular structure. Otherwise, I mean, like pushing a loaded wheelbarrow uphill, emptying it, and going with an empty wheelbarrow downhill makes no sense. Sometimes you're stuck with that, but if you can get away with that, that's a plus. So we're looking at that in like right here, material flows. That's kind of what I was getting at. Yeah, I think we can move on from there. So some of it also has to do with if you're a farmer, how do you get from your farm to your farmer's market? It's logistics as well, offsite. So we can look at this, like what occurs on site and how that's designed and managed. And then we can also look at this in the broader context. Dropping off, you know, a lot of places are doing curbside pickup now, so on and so forth. So it also does take into account, I just mentioned the word logistics. So this is a drawing I did for, this is the same house regarding the water, but it just showed how to move through the property. This, where the arrows are, was vehicular access, and then each one of these little brown lines that one can barely see was access to each one of the garden beds and other aspects on the site. But that ends up being in the final design. Those access paths or so on, chances are they'd be mulched or something of that nature. And coming up next is something to really pay attention to, and anyone that's been around a college campus or pretty much an urban environment has seen this. So everyone's cutting through right here on this access, on this desire path. And there's actually a university, they were redesigning their footpaths through a quad or whatever they call open areas. And they left it basically soil and then watched where everybody was cutting through and designed their paths based on that. That way they could still have their pristine lawn wherever they, you know, wherever that walkway was not. But I thought that was pretty interesting. And I mean, we find this also in the woods. I don't have to go more than 500 feet to find deer paths. and they're using that same path over and over again. So this is really just us being natural, though it also upsets municipalities and others. Vegetation and wildlife. I'm just looking at the time.
I would just say that municipalities aren't exactly natural.
No, but if considering that we are animals, we tend to we tend to find the easiest way to get from point A to point B. And my comment was on how, you know, we're not that different than a deer cutting through a field.
No, my comment was about the municipalities getting upset for us being
Oh yeah.
animals.
Yeah. Well, they tend to like to treat us like animals.
Yes.
But you can cut that out of the recording if you want. Vegetation and wildlife. So we can look at this in two ways. So this is what is existing on your site or crosses through in the case of wildlife, and then what it is that you plan on putting in. So we're looking at what is there, how much of it, where is it, what is its use, is it aggressive? I do not follow the invasiveness realm of things. What is it, and what does it indicate about site conditions? So that can be anything from wet areas. Weediness often is in relation to soil health. A lot of weeds, and I'm not a master at this, but are indicators of soil health. And then we've got just like reading through this a little bit. I think we can move on. Microclimate. So this is what I was bringing up regarding that foundation planting. So that's often in relation to the sun. It's but it can also be a slope. I was working on a farm in that same farm in Granby, and at 5 o'clock every evening, we would have cool air coming down that slope from, it's not really a mountain. We don't have mountains in Connecticut, but coming down that slope. So my growing field was at the base of that, probably pretty much at the same altitude as a stream. And so that ended up being a pocket, it would have been a frost pocket, as well as cool air flowed down there. And that led to mold issues on my tomatoes. And I basically had to move from spraying them with milk and compost tea to spraying them with copper. It was still organic, but it was a lot harsher than I wanted to use. And but that was not taken into account. That was because I did not take into account that airflow coming down the mountain at the end of the day. So right here, the cold air drainage, that's exactly what I ran into, and that would also be a frost pocket. Also look at soil moisture patterns. So a very minute ridge and valley. So a property that I was looking at, the same one that was in the first slide, you would never see it in a topographic map because it was only a valley that was about 3-4 inches deep. And we're looking at, let's just say, a 4-foot by 4-foot section of the property. So down the center of that was just this little valley, but you could see it was greener there than it was on the slopes on either side. So that told me that water's moving down that valley, and those slopes on either side were drying out a little bit quicker. And so it was very interesting to see in that case, and I kind of geeked out on it a little bit, and like, ooh, I just got to see something new, learn something new. But that also shows the need. You can design using your topographic maps and so on. Excuse me one second. Your topographic maps, but it's very important. So I would actually take that drawing and go back to that site and mark up that valley and so on and so forth if I wish to use it for something. And let's say planting elderberry that like wet feet, or I would not want to necessarily plant an apple tree in that because it'll cause more vegetative growth, and you end up the water sprouts and all that fun stuff. So here's a tool that's online. to look at how the sun moves across the sky in regards to a site. So in this case, the sun would come up. You won't see it any time before here because it's still under the horizon. But once it crosses the horizon, then the amount of sunlight on your site, as you can see, it starts to increase. You know, here's noon, where it's at its highest, and then back to it moving down in the sky. I mean, obviously this is not literal, moving down in the sky in the afternoon. Excuse me 1 second again. Another tool that's great for doing this is Google Earth, because there's a slider at the top where you can go back and forth, where you can go back in time for other images. And I use this for determining where shade is. So in one case, I was designing a food forest for a school in New Haven, and you look at a map or a Google Earth image, and it's wintertime, but what you're looking at, the trees have leaves. Makes no sense. So what I would do there is I would look at that particular site, move that slider to probably look through each season: summer, fall, winter, spring, and then back to summer, and not necessarily in that order, but I get to see how the shade patterns on that site, and especially because in this case it was a school, the school building, I knew where to put the growing beds, the raised beds for the kids to grow in, based upon basically where the shade pattern hit in the spring, knowing that it will only there will only be more sunlight as the sun moves more, and obviously I'm not describing this correctly, but you know, the sun is centered in the sky in summer on your solstice. So like right here is summer solstice. So there's more sun, and your shadows are not as long. So, and then as it comes back to the fall, your shadows are going to become longer again. So I was able to actually, and then in Google Earth, you can draw lines and export them. So I would then export that into my GIS software. Everything's geolocated, but I knew exactly where that shade pattern is in the spring and in the fall based upon my growing season. And then from that, knew that I should put my raised beds where they're always going to get sun. And here there's a bioshelter I designed, but here's another way of looking at the sun in the sky. And this particular tool determined these angles. So this is the summer. Remember I was mentioning summer sun, and then this is winter sun. I would have to look at something or zoom in on the drawing to see the exact angles. But and then interesting in this case, this particular polycarbonate wall was angled in the center of these, I believe at 54 degrees. I could be wrong, but it's a lot of this is a process, and this in my opinion, and this is through permaculture, is the goal is to do it right to begin with. That's very important. Next on our list, we've got buildings and infrastructure. Where are your windows? Where are your doors? Doors are tied to access. Permanent pavement. Where does the snow get piled in the winter? Where do you have power lines above ground, below ground? Water faucets that can also go under water, but you end up drawing this layered base map of a property in the design process. And I mean, obviously, a water faucet you're not going to see from Google Earth, but when you're on site doing a site visit. Fences, gateways, again, gateways are tied to your access. And if you recall, I was mentioning how each of these build upon each other. That would be an example of that. Zones of use. So that's tied to where things are placed, where elements are placed on a site. And So where you visit the most on your site should be closer to your house. So your herb garden, it makes sense to have it right outside your kitchen window where your animals are kept, and depending on what those animals are, they would be further out in on the property. Um, and so this is a good example of that. So here in the center, we've got the house. Up above, we've got zone 2. Right here, we've got zone 1, and it's visited daily. I have to really look carefully to read this. Vegetable beds, so on and so forth. Zone 5, your furthest away, is generally wild. That might be a fence line. You don't mow it as much, so on and so forth. 4 can oftentimes is used for perennial trees, bushes, so on and so forth. And it's basically just tied to your access and visitation. Now this is kind of a little something I threw in there. So this is from Temperate Climate Permaculture, and I haven't seen much from them lately. But going back to the edible landscaping, I was talking about the tree, and then we had all the brassicas underneath, and so on and so forth. We can look at edible landscaping through this lens, through the lens of the layered forest garden. And this is what I mean by multi-strata as well, or architecture. We're looking at it in its vertical context. And so we've got, everyone can read what's down underneath there, but, and you can actually design like a Three Sisters garden. So in this case, this tree would be your cornstalk, this vine would be your bean, and we'll just pretend the rest of these perennials are your squash and they're your ground cover. So this is just another way of looking at, and very importantly, looking at design again. So if the sun is here in the sky and this tree is basically shading this tree, we need to make sure that this tree is an understory tree that'll take partial shade, because the sun generally will not end up being over here if over here is south. So there's just like a lot to really think about to do it right. And in my opinion, this is a separation of our typical what's taught as landscape design. And I want to note too, when you're laying something out, lay it out with that plant's eventual growth, what its mature size will be. When you plant it, let's say you buy a tree from Stark Brothers or whatever, it's going to be maybe this 4 or 6 foot tall wispy thing, and it's only 1.5 foot in diameter. At some point in time, it's going to be, depending on what it is, could have a canopy that's 40 feet in diameter. So you want to take into account that, this is, let's pretend this is the tree I'm talking about. When you get it, it's only this tall and a twig, but it'll eventually be this big across. You want to design using this size here. Or you can, you can plan for succession to where as this tree grows, it outcompetes these plants underneath it for sunlight, and they're ones that you don't mind losing, or you dig up and you move elsewhere. But we want to keep that into account. I mean, you walk through you walk through the woods with a heavy canopy, there is not much growing underneath. So, nature is a guide. Soil fertility and management. A lot of this information comes from your soil tests. It comes from observation, looking at your soil. You want to look at your nutrients. Drainage, that's what I was mentioning with the A, B, C, and D. In regards to, I think it was when I had the image of the house. And that would come through the NRCS soil survey, or a printout that the NRCS has. I've got that buried in my computer somewhere. Soil toxins, that came up in the talk regarding uptake from leafy greens. So you don't want to plant really any leafy greens right next to your house. 20 feet is a good distance. So here's an NRCS soil survey for that property in Granby again. And so these are not topographic lines. What these are is each one of these are a different type of soil. And so each one of these designations that's in it, I can't read it from my size, it has a reference. Hinkley, this loam, or whatever it may be. And some of those are good ag soils and some of those are not. So you can actually see that even some of this follows tree lines and so on. Steepness of a slope can indicate some of this because you're going to end up with like the topsoil moving down slope over time. But again, this is not a topographical map. This is an NRCS soil survey map. This information can be found through NRCS web soil survey. If you do a Google search for that, you'll find it. And you basically draw out or draw a square of your property. I think you can type in your address and it'll zoom to your property, and then you have an area of interest, and you go through a bunch of steps and it'll produce this for you, along with a catalog of the soils that are on that site. That can then be referenced to that, and I can't remember what it's called, but it has to do with the permeability of each one of these soils. So the A, B, and C and so on that's on here is not the same as what I was talking about. You actually have to look at, let's say this is what, 41B, I can't read it, but pretend it's 41B, I would have to go look at that other table, see it's 41B, it's got an infiltration rate of 25%. So then I know that in a particular amount of time, 25% of the water that's on that surface is going to percolate.
So Sven,
Yes.
This information from NRCS,
Yes.
is that from actual soil analysis that they did?
Yeah, I don't remember when it was, but it was early. It was earlier in the 20th century that they had NRCS agents go across the entire country and map this stuff out.
Okay, so it may or may not be relevant in 2020.
Well, I mean, things do. I mean, like if you build a house and they bring in fill and things like that,
Yeah.
that really can change. But a lot of this has to actually do with parent soils and not so much. So you're looking at a foot deep, and not so much what's at the surface. That can really change a lot, and then we can manage that pretty easily. You're bringing in compost, bringing in clean fill, doing this, having animals graze on it for 3 years prior to um, planting into it and things like that. I've run into that. I was at a training in agroforestry in Pennsylvania. A guy was leasing farmland, and I don't remember what he was going to do with it, but he was going to put sheep on it for 3 years and graze them to build soil health. And obviously then, excuse me, in relation to holistic management, you really wanted to make sure you moved them when they needed to be moved based upon the grass and the amount of grass they were eating and so on and so forth. You want to do mob grazing. And I thought this guy was starting right from the bat doing it right. So so his goal was not to begin extracting immediately from that. I think he was haying. So if he was going to haying is basically mining your nutrients because you're taking them off of that hay field, bringing them to a farm, they feed it to a horse or whatever. It goes to the bathroom on that site. That manure then ends up in municipal waste, which they often do here in Connecticut. And it never makes it back in the landscape. So, yeah, so just, I guess I can blather on, so I'm going to try not to. And
okay, I just to let you know that the official time is finished, but people are welcome to stay, and you can keep going.
I'm close to done.
Oh, okay.
So,
And everybody, please feel free to ask questions and converse.
I'll open up the I don't have it open so I can see what's on my screen, but I'll open up the questions thing in a moment. So next here's a soil map a soil survey done by Logan Labs. I don't recall which presentation I brought them up in, but I would take a soil sample, send it into Logan Labs. They're my favorite. Then I enter all this information into Organic Calc, which can be found online. And then Organic Calc gives me the recommendations of nutrients that I need to add to my site. And I generally, since I'm not as fluent in soil work as I would like to be, I share that with a friend, and they interpret that application rate. And again, that is specific for me. It's specifically tied to producing nutrient dense plants, which end up feeding wildlife and people. So because I design edible landscapes, I want the food it also has a lot to do with plant health. So the sicker a plant is, the more it'll be feasted upon by insects and disease, um, and so on and so forth. So for me, this is all tied together. What are we looking at here? Okay, this is the last one, aesthetics and sense of place. So we're looking at edible landscaping. We're looking at these fancy kales and that are purple and dinosaur kale and this and that. This was kind of what I was getting at, where in permaculture, aesthetics is basically at the end. I mean, outside in nature, unless you're a specific critter trying to mate with another critter of your same species, peacock. Aesthetics is not that important. And then aesthetics also come into play regarding insects being attracted to flowers. But there's very little aesthetics in nature that is recognized by nature itself. It's pretty much a man-made uh, uh, interest.
Concept.
I'm sorry.
Concept.
Yeah, yeah, and so we lose so much in this. So in permaculture, it's actually at the end, or in Dave Jackie and Eric Tonesmeyer's scale of permanence, it's at the end. It's. I mean, the aesthetics will not produce you more food, and it will not feed more animals or whatever your goals are. It's tied to what we want, and sadly, it's I want my yard to look better than my neighbor's yard, but what does that actually even mean? So it's generally placed at the end. And if you're looking at edible landscaping, if you're looking at, if considering that it's landscaping, yes, aesthetics plays a role. So this is kind of, if I'm designing an edible landscape in the same realm as Rosalind Creasy and Charlie Nardozzi, aesthetics really plays a role. But if you look at a farm, um, and even just rows of vegetables, never mind the tractor rotting out in the woods, it's not designed to be aesthetically pleasing. It's designed for function and production. So this is definitely something that's on a slider, depending on the client or one's individual goals. I covered this in the last slide, but edible landscaping is the use of food producing plants in a residential landscape or public landscape, as we saw with the food forest in Beacon, the Beacon Food Forest, or even a corporate plaza or park. It can be done there as well. There's more of that popping up. Outside of a restaurant, there's an herb garden or something of that nature. Or it's nice to sit in a space where things are blooming, but they're also food producing. It combines fruit and nut trees, berry bushes, vegetables, herbs, edible flowers, along with ornamental plants into an aesthetically pleasing design. We just covered aesthetics. These designs can adopt any garden style and may include anywhere from 1 to 100% edible specimens. So here's a list of recommended reading. And so I've got basically my guide for this, for the presentation earlier, which was Now You Can Have Your Gorgeous Garden and Eat It Too by Rosalind Creasy. Foodscaping, practical and innovative ways to create.
So Sven, you'll send us that list, like
yes,
in a doc, Word file or something like that.
Yeah,
and,
that's easy.
And we'll put it up.
Okay. I did add, and it was in the last presentation, but because it came up, Stephen Barstow and Around the World in 80 Plants. It's not in this slide, but it was at the end of the other presentation. And let me see what else I have here. Oh, information about me. I manage Connecticut edible ecosystems. I'm a permaculture designer and teacher, primarily working on food systems, and most recently, and in relation to COVID-19. looking to bolster empowerment and self-sufficiency in urban environments. I'll just slowly scroll through this. A little bit about me. Okay, that's it. I'm going to open up the questions. I can't even see where to do that.
I don't think there's much in the chat, but this is only among people in this group. So why don't people just unmute yourselves and speak up?
I have a question.
Just one thing.
Yeah.
You want to share your screen?
What?
You're talking to me?
No, I'm talking to Sven.
Oh,
I can do it. I can
with
do
my
it.
head? Okay, go for it.
That's okay. I can do it.
I have a question. We were talking about feeding animals, and we have a vegetable garden. And I've been wondering if by planting some of the vegetables that they eat around the periphery of our yard, which is small, we might encourage them to go elsewhere, or if it would just attract more.
So what you were talking about, or what you're asking about, is basically trap cropping. And that is literally planting something, like I mentioned, that deer trail. I could stop, if I planted something I know they like before that trail and basically enters my garden, I could stop them from entering my garden. Most critters are lazy and don't want to do any work. So I would say yes, that's always a plus. And something that should be thought about. So even in that landscape design, in a sense, it doesn't matter if it's, you're on 1/10 of an acre or 25 acres. By paying attention to what is moving through your property, you can plant certain things for them. I mean, so one of the things I know that's like actually illegal, but I've seen it, is what do they call those? I saw it also in Pennsylvania when I was down there for training. It was a food plot. And so this landowner had planted a whole bunch of brassicas. I saw it, I was like, oh wow, they just planted a whole bunch of daikon radish, tillage radish. I thought it was so cool. And but literally it was so he could shoot deer from his porch. And but if
a real sporting type.
Yeah. But and so that's actually not considered baiting, which is strange. It was legal there, but you could, let's just say, sheet mulch an area, plant some brassicas or whatever in that, and that could be, and if that's put near where that deer trail is, it could act the same way, minus the lack of sportsmanship. So there was think something.
Yeah, we have rabbits, and I don't mind. I'm perfectly happy with rabbits, but not when they're eating our, lettuce.
No. So here's something too. So when I started this in 2008, I don't remember exactly what year it was. I had a woodchuck.
Yes.
Yeah, and it would come into my garden and take one bite out of each tomato, and I got so upset with this thing. And I ended up putting a fence up, and it dug right underneath the fence. I buried the fence. It went right underneath that. And still just one bite out of each tomato. And I like critters. I'm not a hunter. I mean, I fish, and I don't have a problem with hunting and so on. But I did not want to harm this thing just for being it. So one day I go out there, and I can see it. It's out in the yard. And I go into my garden, and sure enough, each tomato had a bite out of it again. And angrily, I threw a tomato at this thing. And next thing I know, it's scampering over to the tomato, goes up on its hind legs, it's just eating it like an apple. And I was like, oh my God, isn't that so cute? And I I threw another one, it scampered and tried to get in front of it like a little, like, you know, somebody teaching a little kid little league. And so the next thought out of my mind was, why don't I just take damaged produce, and because even without the bite out of it, there's going to be damaged produce in the garden, and put it by its den, which was underneath the tool shed. And so every morning I would just pick, you know, some lettuce leaves, some kale, a tomato that got squishy, whatever, and put it by its den. It never went in the garden again. And I was like, I just got schooled by a woodchuck. And that won't always work. I have trapped them and brought them elsewhere.
Which is illegal in Massachusetts.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, right.
It's also illegal
Exactly.
here. It's also illegal here, but I'm not going to dispatch an animal just for being.
Oh yeah, that was our feeling.
Yeah. So,
I mean,
Oh, so
you
it's
could
legal.
decide that you were going to be in the same food chain as this here
yeah.
groundhog.
So it's not illegal to kill it, but it's illegal to move
No,
it.
it's illegal to kill it too.
Oh, I don't
Nobody's
think
explained a legal way of dealing with them.
I've heard horror stories. I mean, there was a guy who was a veterinarian who was doing basically trapping squirrels and just putting them into a garbage can full of water. And I was just like, no, that's not me. I'm going to learn to live with whatever it is and figure out ways, because the way I look at it is I'm the one that's placing the buffet in its landscape and in its yard.
Exactly.
And so
We're the invasive species.
and
We
so
certainly are.
it's my job to figure that out. And I trap crops, or what I generally do now is just plant more than what I'm personally going to eat. Doesn't matter if it's trees, fruit, nuts, whatever. Because I'm taking up space in the natural environment. So, and I'm in some ways managing, stewarding that space, and denying these critters their space or their access. So I should provide for them because I've changed that landscape. And it's not so much to, you know, have more woodchucks, this and that. I mean, so here's an interesting thing. In New Haven, the trees that are being planted, we have pear, Amelanchier, the shadblow, and which is so pear, crabapple, cherry, and so on, but none of them outside of the Amelanchier are food producing. One of the arguments is it'll attract more rodents. And I'm like, we already have them. So, and we also have food insecurity. So it's kind of, I disagree with it. And I'm working as hard as I can to change it without actually upsetting people. But yeah.
I'd like to ask a couple of questions.
Oh, please.
One is about Logan Lab. In Massachusetts, we have the option to send things to Logan Lab or to send it to the UMass testing.
Mm-hmm.
And why would you choose one over the other? And the other is about the lead in soils and the idea that the fruit is less likely to be affected than the leaf. So I wonder whether there's some resource that would compare, for instance, like raspberries, zucchini, butternut squash, tomatoes, whatever. Are all of those fruits similarly, or is there a range of lead in the fruits?
Okay, so starting off with labs, I use Logan Labs because it's the most comprehensive test that I have seen. It's also the one recommended by the Bionutrient Food Association, which Dan Kittredge in Massachusetts started, and he's connected to Mass NOFA through family. I sent my ex-girlfriend to UMass to get her soil tested. And I actually was up on site. I'm not far. I know the campus, and that was primarily because of, I think, location. But we also didn't need to spend $60-$70 on that test. It was for a couple raised beds, not a larger landscape. So really depending, I generally, as a business owner, go to Logan Labs. It is more expensive. but it does give you more information. UMass does a pretty good job because you can actually list if it's, you know, flower bed, vegetables, and then what types of vegetables and so on and so forth. And they'll give you recommendations on amendments. And then the second half of your question, I have not
What's
seen.
the Logan Lab? What's the Logan Lab information that you get that you don't get from UMass?
I would have to look at the two
Okay.
side by side again. I don't know directly offhand. I know it's a little bit cheaper, and we have UConn here in Connecticut along with our agriculture experiment station, but I'm seeing the information that's coming back from them being very generic, whereas Logan Labs, I believe, does a different test. On that note, though, is anyone here familiar with Ray Archuleta? He's called the Soil Guy. If you Google the Soil Guy, he worked for the NRCS for over 30 years as a conservationist and soil scientist, and he has developed. He and I think Gabe Brown, if I'm getting the names correctly, developed a way, with others, to do a soil test. I think because the way they test stuff in soil right now is using an acid, like to give you the results. And what they did was use one that uses water. And so what is in soil is basically in an aquatic environment anyways. And that's the same way that plants take things up. So they were trying to mimic a more natural testing regimen in relation to how plants work than basically frying soil in acid to get a result. And I'd like to learn more about that. I just heard about it. I don't know much about it. And then you were asking about the different fruits in regards to what they uptake. So
Lead, specifically lead.
yeah, I would look at that more like, are you allowing your fruit to trail along the ground if it's a squash or something of that nature versus a tomato on a stake? Because that has to do with the dust and lead in the soil at the ground level moving around, or something snaking along the ground and that lead being on it, not so much in it, but being on it, versus the uptake. And I would, in general, just generally cautious, but it also, most of the time, lead affects young developing minds. And it can affect older people in higher concentrations. But it's really your leafy greens are basically act as hyperaccumulators. And so they will, and I'm going to segue for a second after this, but they act as hyperaccumulators, meaning, or accumulators at least, meaning they're mining this stuff into them. Now, one of the things that's kind of freaking me out is one of our newest crops to hit the market. And in Massachusetts, that would be marijuana. And in other states, that would be hemp. And hemp, basically, considering the plants are very close to being the same, is a hyperaccumulator. And if those farmers or those growers are not paying attention to the contaminants in their soil, and that product is supposed to be medicinal, they are mining toxic materials from the earth, whether they're natural or man has put them there, people have put them there, into a medicinal product that is turned into something else or smoked as flour or whatever. And that's, I mean, I've done some soil health consults in Massachusetts and spoken to some conference organizers on the need of, and again, it has to do with soil health equals plant health equals people/wildlife health. And there has not been much reception to that. And that's something that does concern me. And I'm an advocate. I mean, also as a veteran, these products have medicinal and beneficial use. If one doesn't believe that, then at least hemp has a beneficial use. But do you want a hemp oil that you're rubbing on your skin for pain or whatever it may be, or CBD oil? Do you want that to contain toxic metals? I think not. So even if it's grown organically, that still doesn't mean that that soil is healthy. It's probably healthier, going back to the last talk on what chemicals and fertilizers do to soil, but it still can uptake these toxic materials, which is something that concerns me.
Thank you.
Is there a home test for lead?
Yes, there's actually, I think at garden centers you can buy it. You put a couple pinches of soil into a little vial, you shake it up, and if it turns blue, it's this. If you, but I have seen them. The ag stations or such as UMass or the land grant universities, I think can also test for lead. Some municipalities do it. Maybe the health district does it as well. But I generally just recommend that one does not plant leafy greens in soil right next to their house. If their house
Oh,
was
yeah.
built prior to like 1980.
UMass Boston includes lead in their general soil analysis.
Okay, excellent. Do we have more questions? Have I answered all your questions?
I have too many to start on.
Oh, pick one.
Well, I've been curious if, and I'm probably not pronouncing this right. What is the effect on the mycorrhizal connections between plants when you're digging them up and putting different ones in periodically?
Well, no doubt it disrupts that mycelial network. I would say especially if you're planting vegetables into your flower beds, in a sense, and I'm kind of generalizing. So this is something that's already existing. I would recommend basically cutting the vegetable plant off at its base, where at the soil line, and leave those roots in the ground. The next season, I would just use a hori or something of that nature to kind of stab, pull back, put in a plug back in. Depending, in some of the images from the earlier presentation, I'm not sure if those are planted as larger plants or just small, a 2-inch plant in a plug that one grew in a cell tray. So then, no matter what, anytime you disturb the soil, the top couple inches of the soil, you are affecting the mycelial network that's in there. It tends to be kind of resilient, but so there's actually argument that between the prairie grasses and the damage to the mycelial network in the Great Plains is what led, from all the tilling, is what led to the Dust Bowl. So, and there's other ways to keep feeding, using wood chips as mulch, especially ramial wood chips, which are from hardwood branches 2 inches and smaller. Michael Phelps brings this up. The lignin in those branches feeds the mycelium quite well, and better than other sized woody material.
Oh.
But now try again.
It sounds like a job for those more robust leaf shredders.
Yeah, and so I'm I've never gotten. I've seen the tree trimming trucks out there, but the problem is, okay, I've got, there's poison ivy, there's evergreen, and there's 2-inch branches, or they just took down a whole tree, a chestnut or whatever it may be, probably not chestnut, but huge maple tree. But the majority of that mass in that truck is, 2 foot, not that it's actually 2 foot around, but it's chipped up 18-inch or whatever material. So it's not always that easy to catch or to find material that is at that size. But that is the best. So some of what it may seem like I bounce around a lot between the different books and the different aspects, but there is so much to put together that I rarely find it in one place. So in this case, it's Michael Phillips and his apple orchards and what he's doing with them in the mycelial support that he's trying to build there.
And is he in one of the books, or is he online, or
He's online. He's up in New Hampshire. I believe his orchard is Lost something orchard. 1 second. I've got 2 of his books somewhere.
So I hate to end this conversation, but I need to move on. So unfortunately, the meeting moves on with me.
Okay, so what's next?
Well,
thank you, Adam, and thank you, Sven.
yeah.
Yes, this was fascinating.
So Sven, can people contact you with more questions?
Sure. Is there a way that you can share my email, or should I create a document and like kind of put it up?
You can just tell people what it is.
Okay.
And then we'll have other contact information up.
Oh, actually, I'm going to scroll back through. I'm going to share the screen. I don't actually want screen 2. Share. Here we are. Can everybody see that?
Yes, got it.
Okay, thanks, Ed.
Again, thank you, Sven. Thank you, Adam. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Clarice. Great to see you here.
Good to see
Thank
you.
you, Deborah. Thanks, Ed. Good to see you here too.
Thanks for having me.
Sven, it was great. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Okay, take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.